Pre-formation decision number 6 is the residency question, and it only opens for coaches whose situation doesn't match the assumption Unit 2.5 was operating on. The default assumption is a coach with one home, one office, one state of operation, and a client base served from that single base. For most coaches at founding stage, the assumption holds and the formation decision is clean. The minority case, split residency, foreign residency, traveling without a fixed base, is what this unit covers. 6 minutes to identify whether you're the minority case, and if you are, which downstream module owns the depth. The last unit's assumption was single state residency, and the assumption did real work in the methodology. The three-factor state of formation analysis from 2.5 took for granted that you knew which state was home, which state your clients were in, and which state you'd be operating from. The home state default rested on that clarity. When the residency picture isn't clear, because you split time between two states, because you live abroad, because you don't have a fixed home, the default doesn't operate the same way. Each of the 4 profiles in this unit breaks the assumption in a specific way, and each break has its own questions to answer before you file. 4 profiles, named up front so you can self-identify quickly. Profile 1, multi-state split, where you genuinely divide time between 2 or more states across the year. Profile 2, foreign resident with U.S. clients, where you live outside the United States but service U.S.-based clients through a U.S. entity. Profile 3, U.S. citizen living abroad, where you hold U.S. citizenship or permanent residency but live and work outside the country. Profile 4, traveling coach, where you have no fixed physical home and move between states or countries continuously. If you're a single state resident operating from a home office, none of these 4 apply to you, and the unit is genuinely optional. The first profile is the Snowbird and the 2-office coach. If you spend real months in 2 states, the 183-day test will pull you into both as the screen, but the screen is not the decision. States look at where your driver's license is issued, where you vote, where your dentist and primary care doctor are, and where the family belongings actually sit between trips. The pragmatic move is to pick one state as the domicile and align the documentary trail to it. Otherwise, both states will assess, and you'll spend the year explaining yourself to 2 revenue departments instead of building practice. The risk in the multi-state split case is both states claiming you as a resident at the same time. If New York and Florida both treat you as a resident in the same tax year, you owe state income tax in both jurisdictions on the same coaching income, and there is no automatic credit mechanism between them to prevent the double taxation. The resolution is establishing clear documented domicile in one state and producing the evidence that backs up the claim: driver's license, voter registration, bank accounts, medical providers, the address you return to. This is a CPA conversation with someone who does multi-state work, because the documentation strategy is fact-specific to your travel pattern and your state pair. Profile 2, foreign resident with U.S. clients. You live outside the United States, your clients are US-based, and you're forming a US entity to service them properly. The state of formation question matters less for you than it does for a US resident coach, because your personal income tax in your country of residence is generally driven by your country's tax code, not the state your US entity was formed in. The questions that actually matter are different ones. Whether you need an ITIN or an EIN, what tax treaty position your country of residence has with the US, and whether Form 50472 applies because you're the foreign owner of a US single-member LLC. Module 18.4 covers all of these in full. Profile 3, U.S. citizen living abroad. You hold U.S. citizenship or permanent residency. You live and work outside the country, and the U.S. tax system treats you as taxable on worldwide income regardless of where you physically are. Live issues include the foreign earned income exclusion versus the foreign tax credit decision, the FBAR filing requirement for foreign bank accounts above the threshold, FATCA reporting obligations, and totalization agreements between the U.S. and your country of residence that affect Social Security contributions. Module 18.5 covers the depth. Pre-expatriate planning with a CPA before you move is vastly cheaper than reconstructing your tax position after you've already left. Profile 4, traveling coach, full-time remote, no fixed physical home, moving between states or countries on a continuous basis. This is the hardest residency profile to form correctly because the question of where you live is genuinely ambiguous, and states can assert Nexus based on day counts even when you don't consider yourself a resident anywhere. A coach who spends 90 days in each of 4 states over the year may be claimed by all 4 or by none, depending on documentation. The traveling lifestyle doesn't automatically opt you out of state taxation. If anything, it opens more states' claims on you simultaneously, unless you take action to anchor a documented domicile. Practical resolution for the traveling coach profile usually involves establishing a clear documented domicile in a no income tax state: Florida, Texas, Nevada, Wyoming, South Dakota. The domicile has to be real, not just nominal. Driver's license issued in that state, voter registration there, bank accounts based there, mail forwarding service with a physical address, and ideally a property interest or long-term lease in the state. This is not a DIY decision. The work involves a CPA familiar with multi-state nexus questions, and often an attorney for the domicile establishment piece, because the documentation strategy has to survive a residency audit in whichever state you previously lived in. Nexus and formation interact in ways that surprise coaches who think geographically about clients. California is the cleanest example. California's Franchise Tax Board asserts Nexus over LLCs doing business with California resident clients for compensation, even when the LLC is formed elsewhere and the coach lives elsewhere. If you form your entity in Oregon and coach 2 California resident executives over Zoom, your Oregon LLC may need to qualify in California and pay California's $800 minimum LLC tax annually. That's a pre-formation discovery to make from the worksheet, not a post-formation surprise to discover when California sends a notice in your second year. Module 18 handoff is deliberate, and the unit is structured to make the handoff explicit rather than try to cover everything in 6 minutes. Units 18.4 and 18.5 are the full treatments for non-US founders and US coaches abroad, and they go deep into the tax treaty positions, the form-by-form filing obligations, and the strategic decisions around things like FEIE versus FTC. Do not try to resolve international tax questions from this overview. The Module 2 job is to identify which of the 4 profiles applies, and to flag the right Module 18 unit on your formation map before Module 4's entity formation steps execute. A worked example that lands the multi-state split logic. A coach lives 8 months in New York and 4 months in Florida. Her primary home, her doctor, her bank, her voter registration, and her driver's license are all in New York. Under the New York domicile test, that documentation cluster makes her a New York domiciliary, regardless of the time spent in Florida, which means New York's income tax applies to all her coaching income for the year. she forms the entity in New York. If she wants to shift her domicile to Florida later, the operational lift is real. License, voter registration, banking, medical providers, mail address all move to Florida, and a genuine change in how she uses her New York property. It's a residency management project, not a form filing exercise. Open the Residency Profile worksheet and identify which of the 4 profile types describes your situation, with the answer that matches the facts on the ground, rather than the answer that's most convenient. Single state resident operating from home. Close the worksheet. You're done with Module 2. Move to Module 3. Any of the 4 profiles, multi-state split, foreign resident, U.S. abroad, traveling coach, flag the corresponding Module 18 unit on your map before you finalize your formation state, because Module 4's entity formation steps need that flag to execute correctly. 6 preformation decisions, you've worked through them, and Module 3 takes the next step, naming the professionals who run each of these questions on your behalf.